There you go. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alon Eisenstein, and I'm the host of the Germinator. And today I have the privilege and the pleasure of having Mark Abbott with me. Before I introduce Mark, I'm an associate professor of teaching in technology, entrepreneurship, and professional development at the UBC Okanagan School of Engineering in the city of Kelowna. And before introducing our guest for today, I do want to respectfully recognize that I'm hosting this session from my office, which is located in the city of Kelowna, which is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. And thinking about the way that the conversation today is going to flow and thinking about stewardship and the relationship that we have in the case of Mark with the technology, but technology is built on a land, on the land that we live and work in on. And so kind of thinking through about the relationship to the land. The word land in English, I actually never looked at the etymology of the origin of the word land. However, in Syilxchin, which is the language of the Syilx Okanagan, the word for land is Timchulauch. And the word Timchulauch would literally actually not translate to the word land, but it would translate the thing that regenerates the life of or the force or the energy of all living things. So it would literally mean it's the regenerative engine of life itself. And I find that to be very beautiful. And when you call land in that language, you cannot avoid the relationship and the responsibility to maintain the land as healthy and beautiful to sustain life, because you know that once you break that chain, it will stop sustaining life. And so I'm really hoping that we can talk about the same relationship with technology. So, Mark Abbott is the director of Tech Stewardship Initiative and the Engineering Change Lab. Today, we're going to talk about tech stewardship and the future of engineering. A bit about Mark himself. Mark is a professional engineer. He has an MBA. He's also an Ashoka Fellow. And
Mold in
for
your
those
bathroom.
and for those of you who don't know what Ashoka is, then we're going to ask Mark to tell us a bit about it. I do know Ashoka myself. He currently serves as the director of the Tech Storage Lab and the Engineering Change Lab, and they are these are multi-institutional efforts focusing on systemic transformation. Before that, Mark was a senior leader at Mark's Discovery District and a member of the executive team at Engineers Without Borders. And before that, he spent 14 years working for a heavy industrial consulting engineering firm based in Vancouver. And before that, we were just chatting before I hit record. He actually grew up in Kamloops, so he's practically a neighbor. And so we're just musing on the fact that he's so close, and yet we haven't crossed paths yet. The Engineering Change Lab started back in 2015, so it's celebrating 10-year anniversary. So that's great. And the Engineering Change Lab has brought together more than 350 leaders from over 150 tech and engineering organizations and partners in arts and social justice, environmental and indigenous communities. And I'm really looking forward to talking to Mark. So welcome to the Germinator. And I'm going to just flick around here and make sure that we pin our two videos so they don't actually move around. Um, and then I guess the last thing I was going to say is for those of you who are not familiar with the Germinator, and Mark, thank you for agreeing to be my guest. Um, the Germinator is a place where we really sit down and explore how people end up where they ended up in life, especially for somebody who started as an engineer and ended up doing something so magnificent with technology stewardship. I think it's an unlikely evolution from a professional experience. So I would love to hear how you got to where you are today. Um, so maybe let's start from the end. So what is exactly tech stewardship and the engineering change lab? Is it two things that are partly kind of connected to each other? They're two separate. Like how do you explain to people what are these two things?
Yeah, I guess one simple way to think about it is the tech stewardship initiative kind of grew out of the engineering change lab, and now they're running in parallel. Might be easier to start from the beginning, actually, and kind of go up to it. Is that okay?
Sure. Either
Uh,
way is good.
yeah, so I grew up in Kamloops, as you mentioned, and like a lot of high school kids, was getting towards the end of high school, not sure what I wanted to do next. So a guidance counselor said, "Hey, have you thought about engineering? Like you're good at math and science. Have you thought about engineering?" I was like, "Well, what's engineering?" I'd heard of it, but my parents weren't engineers, and I didn't know any engineers well at that point. I just had this vague sense that engineers were people that made things, and it was hard, and I was young and full of kind of, youthful arrogance, sort of, well, I can do something hard. And I had this kind of respect for people who could actually create something or build something. And in some ways, I actually went into it because it was the thing I was least predisposed to. It was like, it's hard, but I can figure it out and do it. And so I found myself in first year of engineering it was then called Caribou College, now Thompson Rivers University. And like a lot of people, I think, enter engineering, went into a little bit of survival mode, like, put your head down, pass the exam. We're here to weed you out and make sure that only the best engineers get through this program. So I did my first year at Caribou, now TRU, and then went to UBC to join mechanical engineering at UBC. And it was a bit of a gauntlet, the math classes, the projects, pass the next exam, get the next project done. And I was always someone who had like bigger questions in me, but there was like really no time. It was always, especially back then, there weren't a lot of ways to kind of get involved in campus the way there are today and everything. This was in the 90s. And so I graduated from the degree and then went straight into a career in industrial consulting engineering, joined a company that was about 30 people in Vancouver at the time, and was with it for almost 15 years. It was 30 when I joined and it was over 300 when I left. And if you'd asked me when I graduated, told me I'd be at the same place for 15 years, I'd be like, no way, I'm going to be changing all these things. But the company kind of really grew and changed around me. So I went from sort of technical engineer to project manager, then started realizing that the problem with most engineering consulting firms isn't actually better engineering. It's that it's a bunch of engineers are trying to run a business and they don't even realize some of the things they don't know. So I did an executive MBA at SFU while working. And unlike a lot of people who do MBAs for big companies, our company was small enough that I would come back after every course and say, like, all these things we don't know about marketing and all these things we don't know about HR. And so helped bring in a bunch of professionals in those different spaces to sort of take over some of the business side stuff from the engineers. And that helped us kind of grow through that 100, 150, 300 sort of point. So for all of that, I went from like head down, pass the exam, kind of survive the engineering education into, get the project built, grow the company kind of head down. But through all of that, I was someone who had these bigger questions in me. And it was kind of by chance, about 10 years into that first 15-year career, that I wound up connecting with professional chapter of Engineers Without Borders, the nonprofit. And so I was in a lunch and learn. Someone had brought them in to talk at our company, and I was one of the people at the end who was kept on having all the ideas. It's like, oh, we can fix poverty. We just have to do this and this and this, and asking all these questions. And in hindsight, the person who came in to facilitate this, who became a friend later, I could just imagine what she was thinking at the time. Her name was Doris, and she must have just been rolling her eyes, like, okay, yeah, yeah, it's simple. And so, but she said, why don't we go for coffee and we'll talk about it? And so, from dipping a toe into learning a little bit about Engineers Without Borders to 5 years later, at the end of that first 15-year career, I was spending more time on volunteering with Engineers Without Borders than this my high paid, cushy leadership role in this consulting firm. So that was kind of a moment where I realized how I was spending my time and where my passions were diverging. So in 2011, made the decision to kind of switch paths from the for-profit world to the nonprofit world and moved to Toronto to join Engineers Without Borders. Maybe I'll pause there because that was quite a bit. And that was
Yeah,
kind of like, I guess, the first chapters. Is that making sense?
absolutely. I would have loved to meet you there and then and see what questions you're asking and again I have a lot of it resonates a lot with the way I see the world and how I ask questions as well. But I do want to share maybe the questioning part with
Yeah.
those who are in attendance. So I don't know if anybody has any question how. And by the way, I found on the Ashoka page on your profile, it says that you I guess you refer to yourself as an accidental engineer, and I was curious about that. So I assume that's kind of part of how that story is that you're just good in math and said, "Have you tried engineering?" Or is there more to that story?
Well, I think part of I've been quite lucky, I think, just in some of these opportunities to come across Engineers Without Borders and some of the things that happened later in my career to have a very untraditional path. And when I first met Engineers Without Borders in that volunteer role, here all of a sudden was a community of people was saying, "Well, wait a minute, what's the world you want to see, and how does your work relate to that?" And I think, especially when I went to school in the '90s and some of that time, there were less people and less organizations and communities asking those questions. So I think my path of just put your head down, pass the exam, get a job, build a job was more, it was a little bit easier to stay in that rut back in my generations. Hopefully now, I think that's starting to change. There's more, you go through school now and they're like, well, how does engineering relate to the sustainable development goals? And there are more organizations on campus where you can get involved in everything. But for me anyway, and I think still, unfortunately, to this day, there is a lot of just sort of you get in your rut and you kind of follow it along, right? And so well, wait a minute, how does my work, contribute to the world I want to see? And here I am killing myself to build these projects and grow this consulting firm. And I had a bit of like a tough time. There's a great quote. I spent a half a year in northern Ghana, in northern Ghana in West Africa with Engineers Without Borders, kind of between one career and the other, as a bit of a transition point. And there's a great quote from West Africa. It's hard to wake a person who's pretending to be asleep. And I think for a while there, I was kind of pretending to be asleep. Like I knew that that where I was spending my time and my effort, my passion was starting to diverge
Right.
from where it actually was, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet. So I was kind of,
Yeah.
well, I can keep doing the high paid, cushy leadership role here and volunteer over here, and that will be good enough. And I think it just took me a while to build up the courage to make the leap to actually switch paths. But the accidental engineering part, I think even in that first career, I was pretty good at math and science, but I wasn't, I'd say in general, I'm an average technical engineer. And the success I've had in my career has actually been some natural strengths and some natural interests I had that I think tend to be overlooked in engineering, like the sort of the more traditional, narrow engineering strengths, I think are amazing and super important. But I think they often overshadow and bring out some of the other things that are needed in engineering. And a lot of it depends on what you think engineering is and isn't. So we started out the call, I think before you even started recording, you were talking, or no, it was in the recording. You were talking about the epistemology, like the background of the word land,
Yeah.
right? The background of the word engineering is fascinating, and what is engineering and what isn't engineering and the history of it. So when I shifted from that for-profit career to join Engineers Without Borders in Toronto back in 2011, I joined the executive team. And Engineers Without Borders, for those who aren't familiar, it's gone through a lot of changes. It started in 2000 back in Waterloo. George and Parker, who are about my age, started it. So it wasn't around when I went to school because they hadn't invented it yet. So I wound up joining it 10 years later. And it's quite a unique and interesting organization that's gone through a lot of different shifts. And one of the things that's been true about it since the very beginning is it's not only doing what people sort of assume, like projects overseas and all these things that people assume. It's always, as part of its mandate, had sort of the evolution of engineering in Canada itself. So I came right into the heart of that back in 2011 of like, or what's going on with engineering, the profession, what's going well, what isn't going well, how's the world changing? And so for 3 or 4 years, I was a broader role in Engineers Without Borders, a broader executive role. But coming into 2015, there was this opportunity to launch something that we wound up calling the Engineering Change Lab, which was actually a multi-organization approach to asking those questions more rigorously. Like, wait a minute, how's the world changing? How does engineering need to evolve itself to live up to its potential in this changing world? So I'd say around 2015 was the beginning of an even more I guess, lucky and privileged opportunity to chart a very different path and to be part of a deeper, really rigorous effort to ask some of those questions about the roots of engineering and the assumptions that never really get challenged, and to really go into that. And that process is still kind of unfolding.
So, um, Thank you for that. And I already have more questions, but I do want to give the opportunity for some of our attendees. If anybody want to have any dibs at asking Mark any question about all the amazing things you've heard so far.
Are most people on the line current engineering students at UBCO? Is that right, or is it?
We have a few faculty members and some grad students and a undergrad and oh, hi, Trevor, a friend from the community.
So I'm going to assume that everyone on the line is an engineer, engineering student, engineering professor. No, Jing, you're shaking your head. What's your background?
She's an engineering professor, but not an engineer, which is
Ah,
also true for myself.
My
cool.
background is in education, not engineering, but I'm now working and teaching engineering communication in the School of Engineering.
Perfect.
Nice to meet you, Mark.
Nice to meet you too. And Alan, what's your actual? I didn't check. Your PhD is in engineering, isn't it? Or am
Nope.
I wrong?
No, my background is in chemistry. I did physical chemistry throughout my bachelor's, master's, and PhD, and transitioned to teaching entrepreneurship and innovation. And here I am in the School of Engineering.
Perfect.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
come back to this in a minute because I think there's a
yeah,
really interesting people who go through a more traditional engineering path or come into the engineering community from other angles. I think is a really fascinating. But for the others on
yeah.
the call, Mehdi, Osama, Trevor, Yannick, if any of you are engineers, I'd love to know why you went into engineering. And if you were to describe, like, let's say you had a friend who's like, "Hey, you're in engineering. I'm thinking about switching to engineering or going to engineering." What would be your short description of engineering? And this isn't a trick question. I'm just curious. Like, there's lots of ways you could answer it, but why did you personally go into engineering? Why would you? How would you describe it to someone who was thinking about going into it? Mehdi, you turned your video on, so you volunteered yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you very much for your talk, and I really enjoy that. So I'm a PhD student. My supervisor is Alon. So I'm a engineer by training, and the reason that I picked engineer because um, I when I was a high schooler, I was an inventor kind of. So and then couple of advisors at that time they said that engineering science is the best for me and I got bachelor's and then I master's degree from mechanical engineering. But then instead of PhD in engineering, I decided to do something else. Well, kind of unconventional somehow. And I decided to do my PhD in area that engineering will be different when it comes to the kind of conventional definition. So we're gonna see the global impact of engineering, but in a way that we would be able to merge the concept of social entrepreneurship into the engineering or something like global engineering or engineering without borders.
Ah, amazing. So is
So
the
yeah,
PhD, it's not in the Faculty of Engineering, it's in a social science faculty or
is
what
it
faculty?
that's interdisciplinary studies
Ah,
right now?
cool.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So this is the area that I'm exploring to see how we would be able to incorporate social entrepreneurship concept into the engineering education in order to create more sustainable communities.
Cool. So I described a little bit what I thought engineering was in the very early days and then coming into it and sort of, what's funny is like in hindsight, no one ever talked about what engineering was when I went into it. It was just like you started taking courses and you just sort of, well, I guess this is engineering, right? And so we'll get to that in a moment here. But so you had, I think, one of those more traditional pathways into like, oh, an inventor, someone, oh, engineering, right?
Yeah.
What do you sort of recall what you thought it was and then what you sort of discovered? Was it what you thought it was going to be as soon as you got into it, or were there surprises along the way?
At some point, I believe that engineering science gave me more skills that I could develop my talents for invention or creating more stuff with the more kind of tools and knowledge. And also at that time, I realized, okay, I can use some software for simulations rather than just making a stuff. And so that was kind of another approach to yeah creating a stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. And I don't know if anyone else wants to unfreeze and share a little bit about their engineering journey too. Is anyone or people just wanting to listen? Oh,
Yeah,
Osama,
I,
go
I
for it.
can share. Yeah, I can share a little about my engineering journey. So I'm currently in the software engineering world, and my journey started when like I was in my high school. Like we had like the final exams in which in my like computer paper there was like a question which we didn't like solved in our uh in our school time. It was like a complex question which was like related to building like a voting system in Java programming, which is like programming language we studied. So that time all that like creativity and everything came in, like all logic algorithm that you studied how you can like apply to that, solve that problem. And that like gave me that boost that I want to be in this computer engineering, software engineering world. And that's why like I picked bachelor's in computer engineering. And in my like final year project, I built like a gym management system for our gym in the university. And uh, those things like gave me that like a boost also, that whatever I'm creating, it's being used by real people in the real world and it's impacting their lives. And that like seeing all those like the uh, designs that you create of like web pages and seeing those UI reflecting back within like 5-10 minutes of coding. So
I love it. Yeah,
that
like
was
the problem solving, the the creativity,
yeah.
the feedback, the real world impact. Mehdi, you talked about the invention sort of side. I think these are amazing and great. And that was one of the things that I really enjoyed in my first career of 15 years was I was doing kind of heavy industrial stuff, but we weren't building brand new plants. We were doing stuff within existing plants. So one of the things I loved is from preliminary engineering and economics with like a tie at an office to like hard steel-toed boots and hard hats at, later in the year watching the thing get built. Like I really liked the tangibility kind of aspect was
Yeah.
something. And as you guys know, like engineering is, yeah, I mean, you could be doing so many different things. One of my
So
friends who graduated electrical engineering, I was a mechanical as well. One of my friends who graduated electrical engineering, he was the top electrical engineering student of his year, or the top engineering student. He wound up to work in F1. He's been working in F1. He's the chief of on-track electronics for Mercedes right now, and he's been working in F1 for like 30 years. So I mean, something I loved about engineering going in was not feeling boxed in and all the things I could do about it with it coming out. But I talked about sort of I had that first more typical 15-year career, and there was this moment in my very first, I remember I went to my first national conference of Engineers Without Borders, and Ralph Nader, I don't know if you guys know Ralph Nader. He's a famous kind of activist in the US who once ran for president in the US. He was given the keynote at this conference with like 600, 700 Engineers Without Borders, mostly young leaders. And he was super passionate. He's talking about like this generation is like is amazing, but it's also kind of entitled, and everyone's sitting on the bench, and you have to like advocate and change. And I'm sitting here like slinking down in my chair, thinking like, oh, I'm selling out doing this industrial consulting engineering, and I should, and it's that moment when I was still pretending to be asleep and not wanting to come back, right? But literally during that speech, this light bulb went on for me, and it said, like, wait a minute, this engineering we're doing, this heavy industrial consulting engineering, all of our projects are sort of like improvements within the existing plant. What if, and I've been reading Paul Hawkins, who wrote like The Ecology of Commerce, and in the book he talks about how humans are the only species that have true waste streams. Everything else in nature, a waste stream is a feed to something else. So I've been reading this book, I'm listening to this talk, and I went from like slinking down in my chair to thinking, wait a minute, what if my consulting firm, rather than just being like every other consulting firm where our people are our strength and we're a little bit better than the next one, what if we actually had a more ambitious mandate? And what if our vision as a consulting firm was to remove all waste streams from industrial plants? Because waste is inefficiency. Now, we might never get there, but isn't that a hell of a lot more inspiring and exciting and innovative? And so I was, like in my young 30s at the time, I was the young one on the leadership team. Everyone else on the leadership team is 15, 20 years older than me. And in hindsight, I think like, again, I was a bit pretending to be asleep, that the owners were getting ready to retire and they would tell me, like, yeah, go for it, Mark, as long as it doesn't cost too much, right? The reality was they weren't in it for like that big vision, right? And I sort of fooled myself for a couple of years, but had they have been, I might still be there, like looking for that, doing something kind of exciting. when I finally realized it wasn't in the cards there and, made the shift to Engineers Without Borders, I eventually actually wound up meeting, there's a professor at U of T who wound up becoming involved in the Engineering Change Lab, Doug Reeves, who was one of the co-inventors of the zero effluent pulp mill, which basically did that idea to a certain extent. Like in a certain type of pulp and paper process, they actually closed the loop so there weren't major effluent streams. But anyway, so as I was saying, I had these kind of few years on Engineers Without Borders, and what attracted me to Engineers Without Borders at the time was they were big into systems thinking and systems change. Like they'd started out way back in the beginning of Engineers Without Borders, where most people kind of start out. It's like, oh, we'll go drill wells, we'll go, put in solar, do all these things. But what happened in the early days of Engineers Without Borders is all the volunteers would come back and everything, and they'd say, well, wait a minute, something else is going on here because, we're drilling this new well beside this old well that's out of service, beside this other old well that's out of service, and people just keep seeming to drill wells and nothing ever really changes. And so, as a really unique learning organization in those early days, we're asking the deeper questions like, well, what's actually going on here? And that brought us into the world of systems thinking and systems change. And if you're not familiar with that world, I still remember when I was starting to come into it, like I remember this PhD in systems thinking was explaining systems thinking to me. He's like, I get that. Because as engineers, we're trained actually in some elements of systems thinking to break down a system into its parts and its relationships. But there's this whole deeper, bigger world of systems thinking and systems change from biology, from evolution, from all these other fields, and people who have applied that to the field of change making and social entrepreneurship. Like, the Ashoka world that I'm an Ashoka Fellow touches into that. But there's this a really neat world that I really encourage you to check out. Writers like Donella Meadows is one of my favorite in that world, or Senge and a bunch of these people. So for me, when I came in Engineers Without Borders, we've been talking systems thinking and systems change when I was a volunteer, and I thought I got it. Then I got into the national office and realized, wait a minute, I'm only seeing the tip of the iceberg here. So being a curious person, I started reading all of these people and going deep. It's like, yeah, systems change. We can't just keep, changing the parameters in the existing system. We have to get to the deeper underlying pieces. And so that was like in those 3 or 4 years I was on the executive team, in the back of my mind, it was always like, all right, how do we actually do systems change? And so this book had been written in 2014 by Zaid Hassan called The Social Labs Revolution, which was about the process of using something called social lab process to actually change a system. Because I was always going like, yes, systems change, but how do you actually do it? So here's a methodology for doing it called social labs. There's other methodologies like collective impact out of Stanford that are kind of similar. And the general idea with these methodologies is if you want to change this huge system, one way of doing it is you convene a microcosm of the system you're trying to change. So literally, like in our case, it was 40 leaders representing 40 organizations that were a microcosm of engineering in Canada. So we had deans and professors and student leaders from academia. We had CEOs and directors from for-profit, nonprofit government. And in January of 2015, we launched the Engineering Change Lab with 40 leaders representing 40 organizations, as best we could, a microcosm of engineering Canada, sitting in a circle within an Engineers Without Borders conference in Montreal. So like maybe 800 people in this conference, 40 people in the circle. And it launched a crazy journey that is still going to this day. And I'll throw in the chat here, we did a retrospective of the first 5 years of the Engineering Change Lab and the main learning across the way. But one of the things that from the very first workshop that still stands out, like there's these moments in the 10 years that were critical. In this very first workshop, which was designed, we had the support of Rios Partners, which are a global consulting firm that does really high-end work. And so we had this incredible 2.5 day agenda, and the 40 people were kind of brought out of their comfort zone and doing all these things. And there was this moment kind of halfway through, which was an intentional moment where we were trying to make people uncomfortable and get them out of the things they already into something beyond. And the dean of one of the biggest engineering schools in Canada, she's since retired, but she was a powerhouse. She was 5 feet tall, tiny, but when she spoke, everyone listened. Like you could hear a pin drop, right? Like she just carried that kind of. And at one moment in frustration, she said to the room, like, wait a minute, what is engineering? And you could have heard a pin drop. Like no one was confident enough in their answer of what is engineering to fill that space. And it wound up being a big thread through the whole thing. It's like, wait a minute, what is engineering? It's like one of these questions that's like, what do you mean, what is engineering? I picked engineering. I'm in engineering. I know what engineering is.
Yeah.
The truth is, I'm here to tell you, most deans and CEOs and professors and everything have not actually rigorously thought about the question, what is engineering? So what you get in rhetoric is the sort of rhetoric I used to use, and it's not wrong. It's like, well, engineers are problem solvers. Engineering's a mindset. But when you stop and critique that, wait a minute, you could really say that about any profession. It's a profession designed to solve a certain subset of problems with a certain set of with a certain mindset that's kind of suited to that, right? I think what became clear over the years of the engineering change lab, like people joined the engineering change lab because there was a sense, and it was co-convened originally by Engineers Without Borders and Engineers Canada. So it was this magical moment where like the young rabble-rousing advocacy organization and like the institution of engineering, the leaders came together to host this larger table. And the energy that launched it was like, it was a little bit of like the Groundhog Day energy, right? People that are reformers in engineering, there's, are passionately working on equity and diversity in engineering or connecting to the SDGs or curriculum reform or whatever the piece is, right? And what we realized over time was these are all pieces of a larger puzzle, but no one's got the box cover that sort of shows how it's all related. And so it winds up being kind of like Groundhog Day because, oh, there's this amazing new initiative. But the people have been around for a while, like, well, wait a minute, didn't we try that 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago? It's like the need is there and it's important, but something's holding back the true progress. And so the Engineering Change Lab has been and continues to be this really unique opportunity to actually get to what is that box cover? What are the deeper things? And the key, I believe, is actually in that very simple question, what is engineering? And so the answer that most people will still give to this day is it's a mindset and engineers are problem solvers. And if only more people listen to engineers, the world would be a better place. What I'd argue was, well, then on the flip side, that's what people say in rhetoric. In practice, somehow the further away you get from designing a bridge in a dark room by yourself, the less real engineering it is, right? But who decided what's real engineering and what isn't, right? And so we kept coming back to that and saying, well, wait a minute, what is engineering? What is engineering? And what we realized was the strengths of engineering have become its weaknesses. We're practical problem solvers. We don't have time for all practical crap about who we are and our place in the world. Just give us your problem and we'll solve it. Being a practical problem solver is a strength until you overdo it. And actually, we have now educators and regulators and CEOs who can't articulate their underlying philosophy of engineering that guides the way that they're shaping the education or the way that they're shaping regulation or whatnot, right? And you can start to poke holes in really interesting ways. If you look at some of these sort of self-referential, like the regulators, well, we have a definition of engineering. Yeah, and it's super self-referential. Engineering is the practice of applying engineering principles to solve problems. Well, what's an engineering principle then? If you've got a definition that's feeding on itself like a snake, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting going here, Alan.
I just wanted to say thanks for the invitation to join your group today, especially to Alan.
Yeah. Hi,
For the
Trevor.
invitation. I'm an engineer in Kelowna, and I have to depart soon. So I just wanted to just say that I really appreciate the invite, and it's lovely to hear your story, Mark, and about Engineers Without Borders. It's actually I've been in the industry for 30 years and also work in academia. And what got me into engineering to start with was my interest in developing countries and Engineers Without Borders and doing that kind of work. And that's what really motivated me to make a difference in the world as a 15-year-old was to, well, what can I do with my life? And it was a time where just had real inspiration to, I wasn't going to be a doctor, I didn't think, or, a teacher. So I thought, well, what is it? And I just got this inspiration to become a engineer. So from that point on, age 15, at a summer camp, I set my stall out to study and to get qualified. And originally in the UK, and I managed to, through different opportunities, been privileged to work in a lot of developing countries around the world, providing sort of intermediate technology. And that's still like a real motivation for me. And sort of having the ability to then partner with larger industry in the mainstream has been sort of fantastic. So I think that what I've found about engineering is, I wasn't the best academic. I at the end of year one, my degree, they passed around the structural engineering test results, and they said they ranged between 8% and 88% or 98%, and everyone said, "Who got 8%?" Well, I got 8%. And
What are you doing
I
now,
realized
Trevor?
I
Are
realized structural
you
engineers was not going to be my calling. But
are you
you know, I
still
had to
working
do
in
it.
international development, or what are you doing now?
I'm in professional practice and I'm in academia. But I'm close to. I'm not as close as I want to be to in international development companies or charities. But that's definitely something I'm looking for more in the future. So
So it sounds
yeah.
like do you consider your path? I'm guessing a little bit based off of potential timeline and everything. Were you was it like an obvious kind of cleared path for you the way you went, or were you kind of like creating your own path a little bit?
Well, I feel like I got my degree. I got my degree from Leeds University, and then I got one job offer, and one job offer was to an amazing firm that opened up so many opportunities to me. I was there for 7 years, and I ended up becoming one of the leaders in the company. And then I did a master's at Cambridge. So, and then I went to a huge firm in the UK, and then I got invited to come to Canada to be an adjunct professor at Dalhousie, and that led to more work here. So it was a progression. Every door that's been open to me, I've tried to be, diligent and work hard with the opportunities I've been given. And I think there are a lot of opportunities, and it's I didn't know I was going to be doing what I'm doing now. I didn't know I was going. I really specialize in green buildings and environmental design and net zero and things like that. But
But it sounds like you.
I didn't know I'd be a good fit for that when I started out. But it happens to have been a good fit for me.
It sounds like, I mean, I know, you said you had to go, but like, it sounds like you have a fascinating story with a lot of really interesting pivots. And like, unlike a lot of people, to have the threads of it all the way back to 15, to have that compass very early is a huge blessing because
Yeah,
those pivots
yeah,
are hard, right? And if you don't have, if you're not clear on the contribution you want to make and your strengths and everything, they're harder to make. But it sounds like
yeah.
you've had a clarity through your journey. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, indeed. And I'm working in Ghana now with engineers. Is there a US Engineers Without
There
Borders?
is, yeah. My friend
Yeah,
Boris, who he
yeah.
was, we were on the executive team in Canada years ago,
It's
and then
with
he shifted
them.
down
It's
to
with
become the
them
CEO of EWB
through
USA.
through University of Iowa. There's a project in Ghana, northern Ghana, which you probably know about, Mark. But it's a kind of a nursery and a clinic and things like that.
I
So
don't
I've
know the
actually
specific project, but
yeah,
Tamale is kind of
yeah.
the capital of the North, and I have fond memories of Ghana.
It'd be
But
nice. It'd be nice to talk more with you some other time, but I don't
yeah,
want to take up the whole show. But
We'll
so I've got
we'll
your
tease Mark to
details, so
come
I'll
down to
connect with you.
Kelowna.
well,
Yeah, come down.
one of the things, just as I was once we launched the Engineering Change Lab USA. It's gone through or Canada. And then a couple years later, there was an Engineering Change Lab USA that launched in parallel. And I was going down to one of their conferences years ago. And it was actually, I think, around an ASEE, the American Society of Engineering Education. And so I was sitting on the plane, and the person next to me she had her laptop open, and it was like obviously engineering stuff. So we started chatting. She was going to the ASEE conference. So I was asking about her work. And she was doing her PhD on the root causes of the Flint, Michigan water crisis. Remember the lead in the pipes and everything?
Mm,
And she was describing how she'd done all of the technical sort of analysis. And then she was starting to go into like the social element, like the local water board and the local government and everything. And her PhD supervisor said, no, 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 stop. That's not engineering.
mm,
And I was like, huh. It's like, why is that? Why do you draw the line there? Like, what is engineering? What is not engineering? And all
yeah.
of these pieces. I know you have to run, Trevor, but one of the things we came to and it's not a definition of engineering because I don't think there is one. Like the word engineering is not that old and has evolved and changed over time. Like it's actually, as an engineer, I was like, when people first asked me, like, well, what's this word? I was like, well, look it up. Like there's a definition. Then you start working more with social scientists and others, and you realize that there's a process of negotiating like the meaning of language over time, and words actually
Yeah.
shift and evolve, and they mean different things to different people. What we've used often in the work world of the Engineering Change Lab to open things up more is, at a basic sense, engineering is the process of creating technology. So notice not engineering the person or engineering the output, which you can also use to define engineering. Engineering the verb, the process. So I'm not saying this is the definition, but it's one I think is useful. Is engineering is the process of creating technology. Okay, Mark, well, you just traded one definition for another. That's engineering. What's technology? The great thing about reconnecting those is for the most part, only engineers or social scientists who are now working in engineering care about engineering and the future of engineering. And so you get all these engineers talking about we got to save engineering. But if you talk about technology in society, everybody cares about that and everybody sees their kind of role in it, right? In fact, most of our stories of the future, our movies, our books, and everything are directly or indirectly cautionary tales of us as a society getting our relationship with technology wrong.
Yeah.
Terminator, Wall-E, Matrix, Black Mirror, right? So in our storytelling as humans, we know how important it is to shape our relationship with technology well. And yet, if you look at a typical campus to this day, on one side of the campus, we're training people to create and scale technology, engineers, computer scientists, business people to create and scale technology. Somewhere on the other side of campus, we're training a totally different group of students to think critically about the nature of technology and its impacts, philosophy of technology, science technology studies, critical media studies. So if you want to be really critical of today's, to this date, of the modern engineering profession and the education, you could say that in a way it's designed to turn out Dr. Frankenstein's. So if you remember in the story, Dr. Frankenstein was the doctor, not the monster. Had the ability to create something he didn't adequately understand the nature of or have the ability to steward responsibly. It wasn't bad intentions. It was actually an ignorance. And so when I'm being provocative, I could say, people always say like, oh, how do we can't put in more philosophy or these other things because the engineering curriculum's already too tight. Well, wait a minute. Given in particular, the increased awareness in recent years around AI and social media and all of these things, given the extreme power of technology to shape our world, isn't it irresponsible to start giving people the ability to create that technology, unless like until we know first that they have the ability to understand its nature and have sort of that moral and ethical stewardship compass. Not just I'm a good person, therefore what
Yeah.
I'm doing is good, but actually to grapple with the real tensions within. And that's how Engineering Change Lab became this bigger concept of tech stewardship.
So Mark, if I can use the opportunity and
Yeah,
ask you,
yeah,
and I love how you're kind of picking apart the discussion through the way we define engineer and engineering and what should we be teaching and what isn't and isn't being taught, and also the siloing of how we teach. Um, the word stewardship itself,
yeah,
like what does maybe I'll kind of jump and put a thread in the fact that technology itself is a word that is socially adapting and evolving, and most kids these days when you say technology they automatically think battery, LED, and PCB.
yeah,
But even a pencil is technology and a wheel is technology, right? So anything that we created for to serve our needs that did not naturally occur is technology, essentially. Um, but what is stewardship? What does that stewardship word mean?
yeah,
And more importantly, well, is stewardship the role of the engineer? Should it be
yeah.
the role of the engineer?
Yeah, perfect. So let me start with technology and then do stewardship. So technology, you're absolutely right. Is there's not. I don't believe there's one definitive definition of the word technology, nor should there be. It's actually, I think, part of social change is sort of the battle or the evolution of these different words. A definition of technology that I like that comes from the social sciences is technology is the means by which humans adapt our environments to meet our needs and wants. So if we unpack that for a minute, right? The means. So the means could be physical adaptation, physical technologies, digital, could even be biological, like CRISPR, or gene editing. Could even be social if you want to extend it that far, like a legal system, right? So how do we adapt our environments? What are the means in which we adapt our environments? Environments. So I think historically, technology was the natural environment. How do we physically adapt to the natural environment, right? But if you take environment to mean now the social environment, the political environment, and not just the natural environment, like these overlapping entwined environments, then you can think about, Marshall McLuhan, the famous Canadian social scientist, critical media studies. We shape our tools and our tools shape us. We shape our environments and our environments shape us ultimately, or our technologies and our technologies shape us. So it's this process of of um, of how we're shaping our tools and they're shaping us. And to your point, Alan, like, the social scientists will go right back to the beginning, right? Like when humans started using fire to pre-digest our food, over time, we actually evolved less strong jaws because we
Yeah.
weren't having to process. And so our physical evolution has been entwined with our technological evolution since the beginning of humanity. It's just normally happened so slowly and gradually that we didn't notice it. But now, with AI and some of these new things where the technologies are moving so fast and so powerfully, the nature of that coevolution and the stakes of it are becoming much more. So, stewardship, to jump to that word, is also another word that's changed and evolved. So, the roots of stewardship tend to be like in religion, and there's a bit more of a paternalistic, we have responsibility over as humans over the environment or
Yeah.
whatever, right? But then it obviously got used in the environmental movement in a more, uh, the word evolves, so people now associate with environmental stewardship. And sometimes it still has that paternalistic human sort of side, but often that would get into more of a like, wait a minute, we are the environment too. So and then there's ties with stewardship concepts to indigenous ways of knowing. We debated a lot what was the right language to use with ours. And so when we use the term stewardship, it's about the intentionality with which we are shaping and being shaped by our environments, recognizing that we're all interconnected. So if I'm, even if I don't, even if I'm an engineer who doesn't want to, like, hey, I don't care about all this stuff, I just want to do my piece. Well, unfortunately, that's not the way our systems work and our environments work. Whatever path you're choosing is interrelated with everyone else. So we believe we all have a responsibility to be, to be stewards, to have a practice of stewardship that grapples with all the tensions and things within that. And in particular, if you're going to have the added privilege of being someone who creates technology, an engineer, a computer scientist, or scales it, then you are exerting a power and a privilege to shape these environments in very powerful ways. And that comes with the responsibility to do that with intention and wisdom.
I love that. And it reminds me, and I was chatting with a friend of mine the other day about, he has a startup and it's, AI based and all that and was commenting, the fact that the GPT agents are working when he's not around, right? So we created a system that can, exist even though we're not around. And in a sense, this is like exactly the core idea that once you've engineered something into creation, it has a life of itself, like Dr. Frankenstein. So doesn't it automatically mean that you have a moral obligation to
Yeah.
the creation before you create it and not after you created it? So I love that. I'm very, very much mindful of the time. And I feel like we can spend 5 hours and even then that would not be enough. So it gives me only more appetite to invite you over to our campus because you're just a hopscotch away from UBC Okanagan in Kelowna.
Well, and if you're interested,
Um,
I'll throw in the chat here. We started out looking at the future of engineering, realized actually that uh and this is still an opinion, but I don't think engineering inside the engineering bubble can or will change itself.
mhm.
There's so many self-referential like in the engineering bubble. And that's part of, I think, why we need to expand the conversation to tech and society. Okay, what's the role of the engineering process of the engineer in shaping technology and society? So the concept of tech stewardship emerged from that. We were doing that in sort of smaller form. We were coming to those conclusions, and it was almost like we were paddling before the bigger waves. So you remember in 2017, there was the first Facebook scandal, Cambridge Analytica voting.
Yep.
It's like we'd already been starting to ask these questions when that wave hit. And at the time, it's like, all right, now all of a sudden, before that, you're talking about tech and society and shaping tech well, and everyone's kind of looking at you funny. And now it's like, oh, we get it. We have to shape social media. And it's like, well, actually, we mean all tech, not just social media. But here's a wave
Yeah.
to surf, right? In hindsight, that wasn't like that was a ripple. Then ChatGPT hits a few years ago, and that's like the tsunami. Now you don't have to you don't have to convince people that we should care about shaping our future of technology and everything. There's like it went from sort of this kind of like, how do we sit back in our armchair and talk about like, how we bend the arc of technology gradually towards good, to now it's like everyone is being personally disrupted and having to deal with this thing, right? So it's become urgent and personal. So we've pivoted our work in the last bit to AI stewardship. So tech stewardship broadly and AI stewardship. And my belief is engineering in its current form, like the concept of engineering, the education, the regulation, all of these things have been stuck for a long time. And actually, the AI disruption can hopefully be used to disrupt engineering in a productive way. And it could go different ways. Like it could kind of go the way, like, it could be lead to sort of like a death of engineering, the professionalization and in the ethical sort of side. That's probably actually the most likely path. Or there's a potential path where progressive leaders say, hey, how do we not stick our heads in the sand with this huge disruption of AI and rather use that disruption to bring, a strengthening of professional ethic and professionalism into the shaping of technology in the future. If you're interested in that, we were running I throw in the chat, for a few years, we were doing this kind of in short form, and then we said, this is too slow. How do we get this out in the world? So we created a tech stewardship practice program. It was a 12-hour online micro credential you could get, and we were offering it for almost 4 years, and about 13,000 people engaged with it. Um, so while that was happening, ChatGPT hit an AI. So we pivoted now to a next evolution that's focused on AI, and we couldn't keep the program going, so we paused it, but we made it all available on YouTube. And so the whole program is there, all of the videos. If you want to actually get into beyond just the talk of like we need engineers to be stewards of technology to the practices that are actually, well, what does that actually mean and what does it look like? This is a good entry point to that. And then if you follow tech stewardship on LinkedIn, we're developing right now, we're running cohorts, smaller cohorts of people through an AI version of the program, AI stewardship practice. And what we've realized over time is it's not enough just to plant these concepts. You actually need to create support for people to do these practices day to day. So that's where our work is right now is you can't, like there's lots of people that are seeing this and are alone and disconnected. And what I think the world really needs right now is places where we can actually support each other to not just, put our head down and go down the default path, but to say, well, wait a minute, my university is like bringing in AI, but I'm not sure I'm cool with this. And like, how am I actually, what's my own personal policy on AI usage? Am I going to use it or not? Whatever the professor sort of says, there's going to be a lot of room for kind of gray in there.
Yeah.
And so how at that very, how am I going to shape my own journey? And then how through my work am I going to help shape a better world through my engineering?
Mark, this is absolutely on point with all the things that we've been talking here at the School of Engineering, and I'm going to have to pause it here begrudgingly because we are at a time. But I will use the excuse to say that you mentioned multiple times over this idea of system thinking, and it's a perfect lead away to or lead to my next guest. So this would be in
James, yeah.
2 weeks from now. Yeah, James Stouch. He wrote the book. I think I have it here. Can you see it? There we go. The 55 minutes, a book full of system thinking exercises that I use in my teaching. I actually am running Map the System program at UBC Okanagan, and so about an hour from now, I'm going to have my weekly mentoring session with my students who are participating this year, and we'll eventually one team will get to go to the UK to Oxford with me to compete in the global Map the System. And ATCO has been a sponsor, and James has been an absolute a lovely person to meet as part of this journey of Map the System. And Mark, you can count on me following up after today, and luring you down here. And when I get up to Kamloops, I will definitely ping you for maybe a lunch and I think coffee is not enough. It'll have to be a lunch and a coffee, and maybe a brunch before, because we have lots to pick your brain and share some experience and see what we can do to change the world for a better place. So thank you very much for everyone who attended today. I hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you again next time at the next Germinator. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you.